Hello, everyone. So my name is Govind, part of our global black belt team. Essentially, what that means is we focus on a few areas. We're essentially an extension of engineering in sort of more customer-facing role. So I'm here to talk about how you can build, these reliable copilots with Azure Integration Services, and kind of showcase. I have a demo with Logic Apps that kind of grounds the copilots um, with more reliable output. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the elephant in the room here, right? So Azure OpenAI is kind of like a black hole, especially with its generality and capabilities. It's definitely sucking up a lot of apps and data, but uh, you just saw part do a demo of RAG, which I feel like every application right now is somehow doing that. They're round tripping with these LLMs, but what we're also seeing after you implement that hello world RAG is how can you extend that LLM sort of reasoning, large language model reasoning to your workflows, as well as your systems of record behind integrations, right? So I'm going to explore that. Now, before I do that, just at a high level, the model that we currently have, sort of the GPT-4 Turbo that just got introduced, it has a lot of capabilities, and the fact that it is so general purpose and can be used in so many use cases is one of the reasons why there's so much hype, right? You can pretty much have it generate first drafts, create personalized content, um, generate code. As developers, we all use GitHub Copilot. You saw a demo of Azure Copilot, right? But it also has a lot of limitations that you want to mitigate, and that's where the retriever system kind of comes into play, and also how you structure things and how you integrate with your other systems kind of come into play. There's a lot in this sort of chart, but what I want to highlight is that the emergent capabilities are uh, what you want to adopt, while also kind of mitigating a lot of limitations, right? It cannot plan. It obviously doesn't have common sense reasoning. It's not really goal seeking. So you need to kind of introduce that in your applications. Now, the capabilities just keep on getting better and better. This is somewhat outdated but it's a paper by OpenAI kind of capturing that with more data and compute, how these capabilities just emerge, right? So we're on this sort of exponential curve here of with every model iteration, there are just more use cases where you're going to integrate these models. So there'll be more and more, you know, essentially every app is going to be an intelligent app, right? Um, and certainly OpenAI and Azure are kind of shaping and pushing the frontier here. If you look at a lot of the open source models, you know, GPT-4, as well as sort of 3.5, certainly are like the North Star here. This is actually, this paper just came out this week, kind of documenting in several sort of, dimensions how much capable it is. So pretty much, um, most use cases that you have, there's a value in sort of integrating and round tripping with this. And the way we do that in Microsoft, we've shipped a lot of copilots. Pretty much everything we ship now is going to have this experience of like a copilot. Is we have a stack behind it, and while this may be a architecture, concretely, it's actually made up of services, and specifically even integration services, right? Of course, there's sort of open source SDKs that we have sort of made available for other customers, but we're also helping customers use Azure services to build these copilots, just as we're dogfooding our own copilots with them. So at a high level, like if you think about it, you want the if you go and ask ChatGPT right now about your sort of proprietary domain information to synthesize or reason over, obviously it won't know, right? So you need to ground that. And to do that, there are several ways to do that. I've kind of overlaid this in terms of how well you can sort of ground. So you can probably, if you want to something kind of quickly start, you can use Copilot Studio, but you'll discover that you might need more control. As developers, we often do with the use cases that we work with. So there's APIM that can also kind of be the facade for your sort of plugins. And I have there's actually a colleague of mine, David Barkle. I don't know if he's listening, but he has a great demo of this that you can also check out. But what we're going to focus here is logic apps, which essentially allows you to take any complex workflow and makes it available as a plugin. So we'll see that in action. So that whether it's Microsoft Copilots or your own Copilots, you can kind of ground them. And as you orchestrate, you're going to realize that in this sort of retrieval augmentation, the retriever system becomes very important. And of course, there's persistence layer that certainly grounds that. But a lot of folks will realize pretty soon that there's a lot of information behind your software systems, as well as your SaaS applications, maybe like a Salesforce or SAP or mainframe, etc., that you can kind of unlock with Logic Apps and its connectors easily. So let me just kind of continue and before I go to the demo. So I think we've established that plugins are kind of how you're going to ground the Copilot, and the experiences that you're going to build, will require integrations with these authoritative systems of record, and they have to be, reliable and trustworthy, because ultimately, uh, the proprietary Copilots that you build have to kind of ground themselves in data that is hidden behind APIs and databases as well. And of course, you want them to be scalable, evolvable, as well as security needs to be kind of embedded in the retrieval and system and access patterns. So that's where our integration services kind of come into play. So I'll do like a quick demo, and the idea here is you probably have Microsoft Copilot or your own Copilot, for example, M365 Chat or Windows Copilot, right? They all support this interface called AI plugin. And in this case, you can take your existing Logic app, and that endpoint essentially becomes a plugin because it has a wrapper for that AI plugin essentially abstraction that it looks for. And in the Logic Apps workflow, you can do a more reliable sort of retrieval, right? You can retrieve, I think earlier in the demos, you saw how easy it is to drop in these connectors, whether it's connectors to your persistent systems or your other APIs as well. And then you can even further use a reasoning engine like OpenAI model or even like a proprietary model. And then I kind of call them actuators, but you can also have it do other actions, like maybe notify to Teams or email connectors and things like that, right? So let me kind of go to my screen. So in this sort of example scenario, I have a somewhat simple workflow where it kind of accepts a request, and then I'm constructing a prompt as I sort of aggregate more information for the context. So I'm kind of parallelly retrieving some information from Cosmos DB. So this is like an example of think of it as like a support person trying to assist uh, a new employee or an employee who's looking for like a laptop refresh, right? For example. And in this case, I need information about that employee. So that might be in a different system, right? In this case, Cosmos. So I'm using Cosmos Connector. And in addition to that, I might have to retrieve some information about my knowledge source. So I go to, and by the way, right now I'm using a REST endpoint, but Parth just showed the connector that's going to be built in to Azure AI Search. And then I parse the relevant embeddings, and then I get the relevant chunks, and then basically, I call the large language model to synthesize, and then respond back. Now, this is, nothing special about this. It's just a typical workflow. But what you can do then is essentially take the endpoint that that you can access from the overview blade, and you can go to, either you can go to your own Copilots. So this is a sample app from the Semantic Kernel project. Semantic Kernel, by the way, just a quick side note, is our orchestrator that's powering our Copilots, and it's open sourced as an SDK for C#, Java, as well as Python that you can use on your apps. So in this case, it's just a Semantic Kernel sort of sample app that allows you to add plugins. So it's kind of like you can also, for example, let me just show a quick sort of demo here of how this might work if you procure your own Copilot. So let's say your company, like, procures the Microsoft 365 Copilot, right? Um, and like I said, everything that Microsoft ships now is going to have some part of this. So, like for example, here I have Windows Copilot, which also has this concept of plugins. But I'm just going to stick to this one. So what you'll eventually have is it's in preview now, but imagine next year it's going to be more mainstream, where you'll be able to add these plugins that will kind of ground the Copilot's responses as it synthesizes information. So you can kind of go to this plugin store and you can add more plugins, etc. Right? So now if you have a Logic Apps workflow, you can just copy that the endpoint itself. And here, I'm just going to refresh my custom Copilot. And here, I'll just start a new session. And then all you do is you can go to plugins, and you can already see some existing plugins here, right? I'll add a custom plugin, and then I'll just paste the Logic Apps endpoint that I deployed, and I'll hit Find Manifest. And as you can see, it'll first verify the plugin that it conforms to OpenAPI spec and that it has an OpenAI manifest. It does. It's got a built-in. So now the plugin is there. Now I'll enable the plugin, right? And then now I'll just ask a question like, so imagine I'm like a support person trying to assist an employee who wants to refresh their laptop. So I'll just say, John wants to refresh his laptop, right? So this custom Copilot, Semantic Kernel, has a concept called Planner. Basically, what it did was it intent detected what I'm trying to ask. That the goal is like John is seeking to refresh his laptop. But then because I added that plugin, that's basically a Logic Apps workflow that has an endpoint and a description of what it does, it realized that, oh, rather than me hallucinating and answering something about this, right? Like if you go to ChatGPT, it might just answer something, right? But because I enabled this plugin, it's actually going to, in this case, I'm actually adding human in the loop to proceed with the plan or no. But I could certainly remove that. Uh, but what you can see here is that it kind of broke that down and kind of put that topic in this sort of JSON, right? So the payload topic is refresh laptop and the username is John. And then when I hit proceed with that, now what it's doing is it's actually executing that Logic Apps workflow, which is just a REST endpoint, right? With that information, and that actually goes to LLM and does further synthesis, goes to Cosmos DB. It's aggregating information from Azure Cog Search about the refresh policy of the company, right? Gets information about the user from Cosmos DB, and then it does a bunch of things like notifying through Teams or notifying by email, or even creating a support ticket and things like that. So, and then it responds back, and then it synthesizes the response and answers back to the user. So this flow, you're going to see a lot more, especially as you start using copilots from Microsoft. Like we have a service copilot, we have a sales copilot, right? Or if you build your own copilots, like with Semantic Kernel, as you see here. Now you can also, of course, have more complex stuff, right? Like you can have the retriever system in RAG is very important. And what customers are realizing is that information is just hidden behind many systems. In fact, I think a typical knowledge worker interacts with something like 8 or 10 systems every day. So there's a lot of information behind these systems, right? ServiceNow, Salesforce, etc. Now the cool thing about Logic Apps is you can essentially kind of parallelly retrieve all that information hidden behind so many different systems and kind of aggregate them. And if you want, you can use LLM again to kind of synthesize that or summarize, and kind of take action on them as well, right? Like maybe, of course, posting a feed to Teams or emailing, or even like creating a new Jira ticket. In this case, let's say if the user needed a laptop refresh, it can automatically, kind of like an agent, automatically create a ticket in Jira. I obviously don't have Jira access, but you get the point. Or even send an event to Event Grid, and that can take action on something, or a service bus, right? Run some reliable transaction. So there's a lot that you can, kind of do there, and these patterns are slowly emerging, as customers kind of mature and kind of go and see where else they can apply these reasoning engines that are so capable and powerful. So as you can see, you can really simplify the complex with Azure Integration Services. What you just saw, I actually even kind of compressed the amount of interactions that happen behind the scene in Logic Apps that I was quickly able to kind of drag and drop and configure. But for these copilots, um, you can essentially ground them by, uh, with Logic Apps as plugins. There are other use cases too. I have a sample app where I'm trying to kind of, um, actually, this is from a customer that I'm working with, and I tried to generalize it and put that in a sample. But basically, you can use sort of LLM as a reasoning engine to reduce cycle time for your tasks in your workflow. So in this case, let's say you know you want to do some asynchronous sort of processing involving a large language model, right? Oftentimes, when we talk about these co-pilots, we're talking about synchronous interactions where a human sort of, and especially over a chatbot. But I think that's going to evolve again to, infuse these AI sort of everywhere, right? And let's say, for example, every, um, I mean, again, I would not recommend this, but let's say you have $100 and you want to optimize the investments, uh, or the allocation of that $100 on a daily basis, right? So imagine if you're like a trading desk. I think the model capability right now, we all know that it can hallucinate, so that's why I'm not recommending. But you can imagine that with a human in the loop, you can certainly generate sort of recommendations here. So let's say with Logic Apps, you can kind of set up a timer, right, where every day when the stock market is open, you can sort of aggregate information about the user's preferences, their stock investment, your information that's hidden behind mainframes or other source systems, your investment thesis information, current inflation data, all the information that is needed to make a decision on how you should allocate, stock, how you should allocate money, basically, right, to get a better return. Uh, so all that Logic Apps, you can kind of parallelize and aggregate all that information, and then you can use something like Semantic Kernel with or Azure function that is embedded in the Logic Apps that can kind of call the large language model or directly call LLM, and then you can further sort of get approval email flow. So you'll have human in the loop. Like you could say, hey, maybe today you might want to sell some Nvidia, or invest 10% more in Microsoft or something like that, right? And with Logic Apps, you can kind of easily kind of do all that sort of in one shot and have that run asynchronously sort of every day. And then if they approve it, you can reliably execute that with like a service bus uh, running the transaction. So you can envision in all kinds of scenarios where LLMs could be embedded to kind of improve task efficiency. There are actual use cases too that we see here. This is another one from bank, where again they're using the semantic kernel orchestrator. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll try to go a little bit fast here. But what you see here is sort of a bank representative using their Copilot to help a customer on a new bank loan. So this is similar to that customer service rep, helping a user answer some support-related question, right? So you can use a combination of Logic Apps to use some CRM connector that can, do like on behalf of user flow to ground the model, and you can also use API management as well. Sorry, to like for the plugins to kind of again improve that secure access patterns. Uh, so there are more use cases similar to that. I think in the interest of time, I'm gonna try to kind of showcase some of the other capabilities. Um, Now, the plugins that we talked about, again, we said everything that Microsoft ships is going to have this Copilot service. So M365 Copilot that you just saw, or Windows Copilot. This is kind of how they work. You might go from a natural language question like, hey, do I have any work assigned to me? Now the Copilot service is actually going to first always fetch the plugins that it has. Actually, it'll first intent detect what the user is asking, and then it'll go and get all the plugins in the plugin catalog. So these are just some examples, but you can think of having your own sort of Logic App workflows or plugins that are wrapped with APIM made available. And then once that's sort of done, it can generate a plan and execute a plan with that plugin, right? So that's kind of how these copilots work behind the scenes, and they really extend the value of our copilots. Like so, especially next year, as you see more and more adoption of these Microsoft 365 copilots, you're going to see a lot of investment in plugin development, and I think using Logic Apps is just going to make it super easy to quickly get started with and put a plugin out there. A plugin that is actually like super advanced, right? Because you have all these connectors that can really expand the organization knowledge, right? Like imagine writing a connector for like mainframe or um, you know even ServiceNow and things like that, right? Like you just have to there's so much to deal with that makes it easy with Logic Apps. Again, a lot of SaaS providers are already building plugins for the Microsoft Copilots, so I think it will be more mainstream. There's a lot more that AI as service, Azure Integration Services kind of offer to improve quality attributes or non-functional requirements when it comes to copilots. I think, of course, you have scalability and interoperability as well as workflow automation that you can achieve, right? We talked about retrieval, augmented generation, but maybe you might want to also transact and run them reliably, a combination of Logic App, Service Bus, or Event Grid, right? You'll start to see more of these use cases kind of go to production with customers that are infusing AI everywhere. Of course, the most common one is, I think, earlier in the APIM one, they showed kind of how you can use APIM to improve sort of availability and flexibility, etc., with the reasoning engine. In addition, it's early days, but we're seeing some sort of embodied intelligence come into play. Maybe you want to do some you want to infuse sort of intelligence in your IoT sort of device or devices that have sensors and actuators, right? Of course, we got to be careful here, but we have solutions with Event Grid as well as a combination of Logic Apps, etc., to achieve that. This is just getting started, and I'm seeing a lot of customers sort of start at least show some interest in doing reliable agent loops. So I don't know if folks have heard about AutoGen project from Microsoft. There's also Semantic Kernel's Planner, as well as the new Assistance API that got announced. So again, there you're going to want to run them reliably, and to do so reliably, you want to use a combination of all the Azure Integration Services that we just talked about, especially Logic Apps, etc., so that you can run those workflows that are reliably defined. We're just getting started with all this, I feel like. The goal, again, is to reduce cognitive load required to interact with information systems and create new experiences, right? That's sort of like the idea. And this is a mind share that Andrej is from OpenAI is kind of driving that. LLMs are really going to become like the new operating systems, where everything is sort of going to be round tripped with it because, again, of its generality and reasoning capability. And in fact, there's a project by sort of NVIDIA that is showing that even in edge devices, how you can use LLM to by round tripping with LLM, you can get almost human-like performance, if you will, with edge devices. So the idea here is that there's going to be a lot of AI infusion, and AIs can introduce the quality attributes needed. This is just a sort of sample app that we have, but you're going to, of course, baby step your way into adding AI, sort of infusing AI into your apps. You probably have existing cloud native services, that are let's say hosted in a sort of reliable and enterprise grade fashion with APIM and all the best practices that we talked about, and kind of using our integration services. But now you're probably going to bolt on AI, with a lot of the orchestrators or just API calls, things like that. And as you do that, like you're going to realize that again, that those quality attributes become very important, right? Like if you have a plugin, like how do you sort of kind of host them? We just saw an example with logic apps, and things like that. Now, I don't have too much time, but you can go to this aka.ms/miyagi to see the sample app in action. And earlier I mentioned that demo that my colleague did, David Barkle, did with APIM. You'll also find that policy example there, as well as the workflow definition for the logic apps in this repo. Now, just to kind of close out quickly, every AI app is going to be an AIS app, because as you introduce these productive workflows to reduce cycle time or personalized experiences to improve customer retention, you want to do so, reliably, securely, and all the abilities in place, right? This is a good chart by Gartner, and it's kind of what I'm seeing as well in the industry right now, where initially, there's a lot of internal sort of back office applications that are kind of deployed to production, if you will. Again, those are to make knowledge workers more productive, but we're also starting to see, especially retailers, etc., starting to introduce this to external users and to personalize or hyper personalize experiences. So yeah, so with that, just keep in mind that integration services are kind of key to developing your AI apps, and feel free to reach out for any questions. Yeah, with that, thank you.